All right, today is Tuesday, March 31st. The year is 2026. This is No Easy Answers, and I'm your host, Jules Taylor. And today, like all days, I have no easy answers for you. I'm here with friend of the show, Wahid Azal. This is going to be the fourth conversation I've had on this podcast with a dear friend of mine now. And listeners can go back and check out some of the conversations we've had previously. Um, this is going to be a little different. We did speak about the Iranian feminist revolution at one point. Maybe we can touch a little bit on that, how that has updated since then. But I think the meat of this conversation is going to be the missing sort of Iranian perspective on everything that the average American might not see, not know, not be aware of. Some things, there might be some rudimentary history in there, kind of getting setting the table a little bit. um, but we just started recording because we were already getting to some parts of the conversation. And I was telling you before we hit record about how the conversations with the friends that I have, that some of them are parents, and the ones that are parents are, the ones that I have difficulty sort of, you know, advising them. They're like, what do I tell my kid as far as when they ask me, what do I be when I grow up? What do I do? Why is the world like this? And I was expressing to you that I'm in this sense happy that I don't have kids because I don't have to explain this part of the world and our history to them. And I don't have to be like, hey kid, it's cool you got dreams and aspirations, but the US dollar might not be worth much here in a little while. And the world is sitting on edge trying to figure out what's going on. And it seems like the only way to sort of predict what the unpredictable president might do is if we apply the if we apply the logic of an abusive childhood, or the logic of a rapist, or something to that effect. Like, imagine the most hideous, morally foul creature you could ever conceive, and what might they do in this situation? That seems like the most logical outcome. And what I was just kind of getting to out of this conversation, and I'm not trying to hog the mic. We'll get to Wahid in just a second, but what I'm trying to set up is the question that I didn't plan on asking you. But I think about something like the end of World War One, Germany, the interim years where hyperinflation set in at some point, and the ails of German society were pointed at their Jewish citizens, and how that blame and that resentment grew into the Weimar Republic and ultimately the rest of World War II. Um, but I wonder, something like maybe 20 years from now in the United States, like after the market depreciations of quality of life have settled in, and it's the United States is, in the minds, or the psychological shift that a lot of Americans will have to undergo, which is like, hey, you're not a superpower anymore. The America you knew of doesn't exist. In fact, it changed. And the reason why it changed, I wonder if a lot of society might blame Jewish people writ large for this historical shift, ergo sort of replicating the resentment felt in German society after World War One. And it's just, that we're at this precipice now, that we're at this point in history, is something that I don't even feel like, when I describe it, I feel like sometimes I'm not describing reality, but here we are. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, Wahid?
Where to begin? Where to begin? Let's begin here. As you know very well, and as most people who followed your work and seen me on your podcast know, I am not a supporter of the government in Iran. I very vocally and publicly supported woman life freedom. I wrote an article for Counterpunch in September 2022 that was immediately translated into Persian news and blogosphere and went pretty much viral. The feminist revolution in Iran. But I will say this, that there is a very genuine disconnect between what happened in 2022 in Iran and what has been going on consistently since the middle of 2023. To cut to the chase, basically, woman life freedom was an organic uprising, and it was headless. other than the fact of the woman who was the victim of what triggered that uprising, who was Mahsa Amini, this Kurdish girl who had come visiting to Tehran and was murdered by the state morality police that, as of recently, no longer exists. And this triggered the uprising, and it was organic, and it was supported by a massive cross-section of Iranian society, including many people who were even part of the system in Iran. We came very close. There were several points during that uprising, especially towards the end of 2022, around December 2022, where the system was beginning to totter, and we thought it would fall. But what happened is that there were several different factors. On the geopolitical angle, the Biden administration was very lukewarm, despite their pretensions to the contrary. At least in the media, they were extremely lukewarm to actually do certain things that would have supported the people on the ground. For example, in December or around the end of 2022, if the European Union had put sanctions on the IRGC then, the system in Iran would have in short order, would have collapsed. So then there was an infiltration. There was a massive infiltration within the Women Life Freedom itself. I even witnessed it and experienced it here locally, is that around January of 2023, we suddenly saw many of us who are, with either left-wing or social democratic tendencies from the Iranian angle, being pushed out and shouted down by these supporters of the Iranian monarchy, the son of the former Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. And these people are, and even still now, they are Trump supporters. Many of them have very strong neocon pro-Zionist views. They are extremely anti-left wing. They, in fact, blamed the entire revolution of 1979 on the Iranian left. And they have scores to settle with people who with our kind of political views. So they basically hijacked Woman Life Freedom, and in short order, that movement collapsed and just petered out, whether in Iran itself or whether in the West. And since that time, since 2023, at least the public face of the Iranian opposition has basically split into two factions. One is the supporters of Pahlavi, who are basically an extension of Langley and Tel Aviv. Mm-hmm. And also this former left-wing party. It's a kind of Islamist, Stalinist group known as the MEK, were a guerrilla group leading to the revolution, and then subsequently had a falling out with Ayatollah Khomeini in the early 1980s and switched sides during the middle of the Iran-Iraq War and started supporting Saddam Hussein. This is the MEK, the Mujahideen Khalq. So these are the two public faces of the opposition. The actual grassroots opposition in Iran and its leadership, many are in prison. And the social democratic and left-wing element of the Iranian opposition has pretty much been silent since 2023, ceding the ground, not voluntarily, but being forced to cede the ground to these reactionary forces, many of whom are, basically CIA and Mossad and the whole kit and caboodle. So that's where we stand. I have been very markedly and very conspicuously anti-war. I don't believe that any revolution in history works on the premise of foreign intervention. Even if we take Lenin as an example, in October, the Germans basically put Lenin on a train to the Finland station. They didn't actually do the revolution for Russia, right? So that is a different thing. But this is where we are, and this very vocal pro-monarchist Iranian diaspora, since even before 2023, has been lobbying the United States and Israel for a war. And they got it. And they got it beginning, I would say, as of the end of December last year, when, as a result of the collapse of the rial, the Iranian currency, which was engineered by the United States, and this was confessed to by the Treasury Secretary recently in a press conference. There were protests, nationwide protests, that very swiftly, as of the beginning of January, escalated into riots. However, the jury is out on what exactly happened. From what I'm hearing from many different people, and what I was hearing from friends back in Iran, there was clearly a foreign intervention angle to when these protests went crazy. One of my friends in the city of Shiraz claimed to me that he actually saw for himself that when the people were peacefully marching and protesting about the economic conditions, at one of the days, there was a group of people that jumped out, all dressed in black, with automatic weapons, and started firing indiscriminately both into the crowd, as well as targeting the security people. So these have this sort of thing, and this has been reported in many other towns and cities of Iran. So this has all the pinpoint hallmarks of what we witnessed in Euromaidan in 2014. Same sorts of things that were happened, which means that the same suspects were responsible for what happened. Now, there are inflated numbers being bandied about. Some people have put a number of 18,000 that they claim that the regime killed during this
I think I've heard that as
uprising
high
in
as 30.
January.
Yeah.
Then others as high as 30 and on up. Officially, although even these claims are kind of contestable, the system in Iran has put out the number of 3,000.
Right.
Where this gets quite interesting, and I have interrogated this among several different people I know who have even worked in the Iranian hospital system. This is before the war started. I have no contact with these people at the time, for the time being. They said, just in the lead up to the war, that many of the people who are being brought to morgues were actually security personnel. So we're talking about police officers, riot police, um, uh, traffic cops, um, clerks at various government offices and that
It's
sort of thing. The morgues were filled with these sorts of people. Yeah.
unarmed, right? Like it's my
Un-
understanding the police don't.
Armed and
Yeah.
unarmed.
Okay.
Armed and
Yeah.
unarmed both. Yeah. And obviously also civilians, but the high amount of the people that were being brought to the morgues had some kind of official capacity. So
The
this is where this issue of the numbers of how many people were actually killed, who were they? Were they actually civilians or other numbers is now a issue that needs to be hammered out. There were people killed. There were indiscriminate shootings. Um, Given the nature, the paranoid regime of the paranoid nature of the regime, even before this war started, it is understandable that when you get a situation like that where there are agitators who are jumping out armed and shooting indiscriminately, that this is going to up the ante on the escalation ladder with the system itself. And so they're going to, basically cross also their red lines. So this was provoked, what happened in January. Once it was stamped out, it was obvious that this was only the first phase of what was to come, which came on the 28th of February with the so-called decapitation strike on Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the former supreme leader of Iran. And then on the top of that, the Tomahawk cruise missile attacks in the town of Manab that targeted a girls' elementary school. And it targeted it twice, not
the
once.
double or triple tap they did, and then there's reports out today of a different experimental type of missile that basically breaks apart into like tungsten
Yeah,
shrapnel that
yeah,
hit another school. So it's
that hit. Yeah,
multiple schools. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
They went for the schools. I don't buy the argument that this was a artificial intelligence, error. Even artificial intelligence and these sorts of operations they have a human oversight. So this was obviously an order, and this particular strike was an American one, whereas the one that killed Khamenei was obviously an Israeli one that the Israelis themselves have admitted to. So this is a war of aggression. It is a crime under international law. These are precisely the sorts of things that the Nazis were put before the tribunal at Nuremberg. God only knows if we'll ever get to that sort of situation sometime in the future, but it's something that both legal people and historians need to seriously start to consider, because it was unprovoked. Whether Iran was in violation or not in violation of the NPT, nuclear non-proliferation treaty. That is a very secondary issue. There was no finding by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. There has never been any proof, at least on the surface, that Iran has a nuclear weapons program, although there have been many rumors for years that Iran actually acquired warheads back in the late 90s. These were rumors that have never been either officially, assented to or otherwise, or denied. But officially, Iran doesn't have a weapons grade nuclear program. And so what this was a war of aggression.
Yeah.
And we are now in the fourth week of this. There are people I know in Tehran I have not heard from during this time. No communication, no phone, text, Telegram or any other way. I have no idea. Last year, I lost two of my friends in those attacks in the June 12-day war on the first day, as a matter of fact. So this is pretty bad. And it has basically forced much of us who are not standing with these diasporoids, as I call them, these supporters of Reza Pahlavi and the return of the monarchy, to basically, at minimum, support the war effort by the Islamic Republic against Israel and the United States. So that is where I am standing at the moment. It is a game changer because Iran has exceeded all expectations about its capabilities. The expectation that a decapitation strike on the supreme leader would end the regime has proven false. And at the moment, Iran basically controls the Strait of Hormuz. They have mined much of that area, and they are firing on any tanker that doesn't go through the strait without their permission, doesn't pay the fees, which they're collecting, by the way, in the Chinese yuan. So whatever Mr. Donald Trump was thinking, or whatever the strategists in Langley and the Pentagon were thinking about this, was being the first shot across the bow against BRICS, against the rise of multipolarism. In their pivot to to China and the East, they have failed miserably. Unless they really escalate, and what we're talking about is using nuclear weapons. Effectively, Iran has won. The United States is presently in the quagmire. There are very little choices for the United States, even if they decide to put boots on the ground and implement a land invasion. It is not going to pan out the way they think. If they take Karg Island, the Iranians will immediately missile. So whether you got 500 Marines or on up are going to be dead in short order.
Right.
If they try to land, whether from Sistan, Baluchistan, the coastline, or even the Khuzestan area, there is mountainous terrain immediately above it, and so they will be sitting ducks. So this is an all-around disaster.
This is the dumbest land war in Asia I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
Like this is, like every laymen, experts, military people, they're all just in agreement across the board that this is just a meat grinder. Amongst the friends that I've, spoken to conversations, there's been, hinted at perhaps like, do you think the United States is lying to us about the amount of casualties they've incurred so far? Because there's been a lot of rockets going off. Yeah, I personally think they are. And I think that the only, I'm speculating here, but the only reason to send a bunch of soldiers into a meat grinder would be to sort of conflate the deaths of the totals from the missile barrages incurred and the land invasion, and maybe that would give a rally around the flag sort of thing,
I have circumstantial evidence that they are lying about the numbers of casualties on the American side, because this is about three weeks ago. One of my buddies in Germany, who has since moved from Berlin to Stuttgart, claimed this was about like the first 10 days of the war, that American GIs were being brought into the hospital system in Stuttgart.
Right.
And that the hospital system was calling out for blood donations because they were running short. Now, in a situation like that, you're not talking about a half a dozen people, you're talking about hundreds of people. Now, since Iran targeted all of the military stations, U.S. military stations in the Gulf,
and reports of the bunkers were not very good quality, right?
So this kind of aligns with what my friend was saying. which means that probably we're looking at hundreds of people.
Yeah, I was thinking about that and about the way that, like, just today, the Times of Israel ran a an article, said Netanyahu said frustrated that Mossad promised it could instigate Iran uprising has fallen short. And you made the comparison to the run up to the special military operation with the coup that happened in Ukraine. And it just seems like all of these patterns are kicking in. Like, I'm a guy that has some pattern recognition. And when I see these things go off, it's like, and maybe the most ominous thing was I got a call from a friend the other day who said, hey, Jules, how can you support, like, how you're a leftist and we get it, you don't like the United States, but how can you support the Ayatollah and this war from Iran's perspective? Because you know what they do to gay people there, and you know that women
That's
aren't allowed
nonsense.
to, right? It's total nonsense. And what I'm
Yeah,
saying is that propaganda reoccurring, it was like an oh shit sort of moment for me. It's like the libs are
it's
coming out with yeah,
yeah. It's interesting you bring this up. I have a stalker who's a trans individual, and he's a liberal centrist and just obnoxious as obnoxious is. And the racism that I and ignorance that I've seen from this person
mm,
is on a scale I've never witnessed before. See, Iran is not Saudi Arabia.
right,
Iran is not the Gulf countries. Iran is not the Taliban. In fact, there's a big LGBTQ community in Iran. Tehran itself has several clubs, or used to have. I don't know. Some of these may have been bombed right now. So Iranians don't throw gay people and LGBTQ people off balconies. They're
right,
confusing ISIS, an Israeli American project, which they have now proven with Syria. Those are the folks that will throw off LGBTQ people off balconies, not the Iranians.
right.
Um,
It's
and
the sort of
if
atrocity propaganda that's brought up, and the sort of slander ahead of times that, to me, I mean, folks don't even realize the extent to which they're propagandized because,
exactly,
the response that I had towards this was like, do you understand this preceded the Afghanistan sort of, like, this was what they said about women in Afghanistan, that we had to liberate women from the Taliban. And this reoccurring line, it's not like that deep. It's kind of bumper sticker level, and yet it's
yeah,
seen as kind of a gotcha thing. But it's like the
yeah,
correct response to that is like it's so deep, and part of that is not just that, hey, this is regurgitated propaganda, but um it's also speaks to a fundamental sort of incuriosity towards the other. Like, it speaks towards the caricatures of what the United States has made out of anyone that isn't American. The
yeah,
way that uh there's not only like this haughty sort of sense of superiority, but there's also this like inability to even project onto like thoughts, feelings, a full humanity, agency.
yeah,
And it's so deep that you cannot even, like, somehow these folks are, so the opposite thing to say would be like, well, is it better to have a bunch of, dead schoolgirls and have them wearing hijabs? Like, is that what you're
mm.
really arguing here? That, like, that's what right-wing evangelical crazy psychotic politicians have tweeted that I've seen, you
Well,
know.
I don't, at the moment, other than those who are well informed, I really don't see a difference between countless liberal centrists and the right. You
Sure,
know, the rhetorics. I mean, this particular stalker of mine that I mentioned, their talking points do not diverge very sharply from MAGA's
sure. Yeah,
or the neocons.
right.
So, my thing is, and I think Joseph Massad proved this about 20 years ago in his book, Desiring Arabs, that where the LGBTQ issue and the other is concerned, at least over the last maybe 30, 40 years, and I have many, left wing LGBTQ people recognize this, that a great cross section of this community has, in fact, been absorbed into the consensus of the system.
Mm,
And so it isn't an issue anymore between, anti-LGBTQ and pro-LGBTQ. It's basically the issue now comes down to whether you're with the system or you're not.
yeah.
And but the LGBTQ plus issue has been weaponized by the system. And in these sorts of situations, wherever the Middle East and Islam is concerned, they bring it right out. And these people come right out of the woodwork,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's a great point.
And for me, when you break this down, the underlying issue animating the whole thing is white supremacy, pure and simple. You can be gay and racist. It doesn't, I mean, that doesn't one doesn't preclude the other.
Right.
And in the first world, whether we're talking United States, Canada, or Europe, there are a lot of people who self-identify as left or liberal centrist who are with the consensus, who are with the imperial core's ideology.
Could you,
And I encounter this
yeah.
again and again and again and again in a variety of settings.
So can you maybe speak a little bit towards the sort of what your feel is on Iranian society in the sense that, in the same conversation, like we want to insist that there's like more tolerance than Americans are aware of, that these are not caricatured societies. These are cities that are very much like LA or New York, with millions of people and but we're also talking about a country that's had morality police. We're also speaking about a country when Americans picture this, they picture women in hijabs and they don't think that that's like a thing they do willfully. So how can we kind of square this for Joe Schmo, like the average? And I realize my audience is pretty informed, man. It's like we're not. I don't know why I try and angle this as like, hey, like what is the average American missing? But
What?
maybe they are missing a lot,
What?
a lot.
You know,
But my
yeah.
audience is really informed. But I think just there's just context and space for this sort of thing because we've mentioned a lot of these sort of contradictory notions within this opening salvo here. Yeah.
Well, one thing I will mention that since late 2024, especially since Pezeshkian took over after the assassination of Raisi, people who don't know, the former president of Iran was a gentleman named Raisi. He was a hardliner. He had gone to a conference in Baku, Azerbaijan. On the way back, his plane crashed. It is now becoming pretty obvious that this was an assassination rather than just a
You would
fluke.
think, yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah. But then, under the Iranian constitutions, elections had to be held. So they were held within 60 days. And Pezeshkian, the current president of Iran, was elected. He's a reformist. And since he took over, he pushed very sharply for a resolution of this hijab issue. So as of last year, basically the hijab issue in Iran under law was basically muted.
Hmm.
And they did that, first of all, by abolishing the morality police, which was unprecedented. This morality police had technically been established since 1981 or 1980. And as of early 2025, just before the 12th Day War, it was legally abolished. And that then you begin to see women appearing all over Iran, especially in the cities without the hijab, without being accosted. So the hijab issue was being systematically, um, you know, shelved by the system itself because they recognized that they cannot win this battle with the Iranian people if they want to keep the system. So they basically backed off. And this was unprecedented. Everybody was commenting. A lot of us were saying, well, women, life, freedom won. We didn't, manage to dislodge the regime itself. But on the issue of clothing and the hijab, we won this battle with the regime. And we
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
With the president himself and his faction in the Iranian parliament pushing for the abolition. And for them, it is a survival thing. If you keep fighting the people over this non-issue, especially with the sanctions, being surrounded, and with the threat of war dangling over your head. This is the last thing you want to fight over. So they kind of step back, and even the supreme leader himself, some of his speeches, Khomeini's speeches, final speeches last year, was conceding this point to the Iranian women.
Hmm.
So this is gone. So I would say that your average American Joe listening to this needs to consider that the Iranian people won this point against the system in Iran. So it was a non-issue as of last year.
Right.
So, if people want to use this as an issue that they're backward, they're oppressing women, that wasn't a factor that was in place when this war of aggression against Iran started. Well, technically as of June of last year. And this is the next phase of it. Iran is a very sophisticated society. It is a very educated society. to their credit, although a lot of this was things that were already developing even under the previous regime, a high level of the Iranian population is very educated. They have university degrees, and particularly the women. Women in Iran, disproportionately are more educated than even the men are. So there are more degrees held by percentage by women, whether we're talking about, basic bachelor degrees all the way to PhDs. Disproportionately more women than men. The illiteracy rate is somewhere pretty meager now. It's somewhere in the 12, 13 percentile of the population who are illiterate. And these will be in the very remote rural parts of Iran. But the rest of the population is educated. Everybody can read. And Iranians, by and large, are very, precocious, informed people. When we were in Iran with my late wife and my daughter back in 2015, I was just really amazed at the level of political erudition by your average taxi driver in Tehran.
Right.
I mean, if it was my choice, I would put a lot of these taxi drivers in front of lecture halls for political science,
Yeah. Yeah.
and geopolitics, because the kind of analysis that some of these guys would be offering without even understanding methodology exceeds some of the best papers I've ever read. And some of the things that they were saying was true. And this was back in 2015, just after the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, the initial one. And many of these guys were of one accord that this won't last, and that the issue is something else, and that Israel will not allow the United States to solidify this treaty with Iran.
Sure.
And it happened exactly as they said, because the Obama administration, as of pretty early in 2016, basically decided that they were not going to abide by the very terms that they had negotiated with Iran at the time. So you had minimal snapback sanctions sometime around the middle of 2016. And then again, once Trump came in, the maximum sanctions were put in place once he walked away from that treaty completely. So, the bad faith by the United States that these taxi drivers were telling me back in 2015 has panned out exactly as they said it would,
Yeah.
that it would not abide by its treaties. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about this situation, I realize it goes back further than our current vantage point. And part of that is, yeah, there's been a lot of there's been perfidy, a fucking war crime. There's been faking negotiations so that they can launch missiles, or and then at the same time have some sort of internal coup that they bring forward with the Mossad. And but the bad faith, actions, it should include also Trump ripping up the JCOA. Goes all the way back to I mean, you've refreshed my memory on things like, they had a currency fall apart recently. That was probably due to the maximum pressure sanctions. Their president died in a plane crash. Given all the context of what we've witnessed now, it makes, sense to say that probably was not an accident.
No, it wasn't an accident. I mean, when you look at the facts, it wasn't an accident. It was active sabotage.
Yeah.
And given where they were coming from Baku, which is Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan is heavily infiltrated by Israel. There's Israeli bases in the Republic of Azerbaijan. Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, is very pro-Israel himself. And Raisi and his entourage, which included the then foreign minister of Iran, were on a target. And Raisi was very hardline. So was a perceived threat to the Israelis. So they did what they did. This was not just a fluke event. I didn't like Raisi. Raisi had a lot of blood on his hands. He was known as the butcher of Tehran for what happened in 2022. But we got to cut some slack here where it's needed. This was clearly an act of sabotage. They assassinated a sitting Iranian president, the Israelis. And they've done this sort of thing before, in other contexts besides political figures. The number of nuclear scientists that Israel has just assassinated one after the other, and their families since the zeros.
Yeah. And I look at the conduct of the Iranian military right now, and I get the sense that they're a little too well behaved, in a sense that, like, uh, they are going tit for tat and managing escalation, but certain tactics they have not retaliated in kind with, like the assassination of heads of state. They're not doing that specifically. Now, clearly, they're not bombing hospitals and not bombing schools. They're not indiscriminately targeting civilians the way the United States is. Um, you know, uh, Part of me, man, when I'm just, as a guy that reads philosophy and kind of has a podcast about philosophy, like, I was unaware that someone like Ari Larijani was a guy who had written 3 books on Kant.
Yeah,
Um,
a
and
dissertation actually.
yeah, and so when I started really getting that, even the guy who is the spokesperson for the IRGC has a PhD in Western philosophy.
Yeah.
You know, I started to think, and this sort of brought me to something I listened to Shahid Bolson say recently.
Mm.
He was like, listen, man, he's like, and I'm paraphrasing here, obviously, but he's like, you can take the meditation and the yoga out of Hinduism. You can be spiritual but not religious, but pray a little bit, take a little bit of Christianity out of there. You can cafeteria style sort of assemble your own spirituality out of various traditions, but no one ever co-opts Islam. And he talks about how Islam is incorruptible. And part of me started to think, like, and I really, like, on a moral, ethical level, have I already had sympathy, obviously, for the Iranians in this battle, but my admiration for these folks for not uh for being so committed to Islam and ethics, and that even their tactics in an all-out brutal war like this, one can look at the surface level and evaluate the conduct of one compared to the other, and it's real simple, man. Like, Iranians can't kill American children right now.
No.
We're not there. We don't have our kids there. We have a whole fucking ocean here. But even that Israel and all of its bloodthirst and all of its rampage and all of its barbarism, they're just not mo getting to that level as them. And the way that they can at least keep that part of their hands clean out of this entire ordeal makes me really admire their whatever we call it, their ethos, their moral fiber,
Well, this
you
is
know.
enshrined in what we call the Sunnah, the practice of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. During the wars with the Meccans, 1400 years ago, he himself established rules of engagement on the Muslim side against their pagan enemies. That is, that you don't attack women and children indiscriminately, right? You don't attack the wounded, okay? And
Mm,
you don't cut off your enemy if they're in a position of either retreat or defeat from supplies, food and water, etc.
right.
Right? So these are rules of engagement that are actually enshrined in the very practice, in the very sunnah of Islam itself. Now, Shahid Bolson is a very interesting guy. I listened to him. He's got great things to say, but we got to be careful about Shahid Bolson. Shahid
Yes.
Bolson is a pro-Saudi mouthpiece. And his loyalties are with the Saudi agenda.
Hmm.
So he's extremely anti-Shia at times. Um, he overstates things, understates things. His anti-imperial discourse is phenomenal. If he has tried to package himself as a white Malcolm X, he's succeeded extremely well. But the devil's in the details. And sometimes Bolson says things that, I want to throw something at him,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of feel the same way
So,
about him. I don't know that I have very sharp bones to pick with him, but I realize that he does have an angle,
yeah.
and whereas there's an intersection of sort of Marxist principles and Islam and anti-imperialism, I certainly resonate with him But yeah, you're right. Like he's a mouthpiece for, these Saudis, as you say, right? Like, and that angle, um, he's very good at hiding that, and at times it kind of shows more than others.
Yeah. But other things he says, his anti-imperial discourse, I take nothing away from him. It's spot on. I've shared his content myself. But we still got to be careful with some of the other. He is proselytizing, very preachy sometimes.
Hmm.
In other words, he's doing dawah, which is fine. But the dawah that he's doing is to his, kind of Saudi aligned kind of Islam that, many of us in Iran and outside of Iran, who are Iranians have an extreme problem with. That is
Sure.
the Islam that, is known and documented to throw, LGBTQ plus people off balconies
Yeah,
and
I noticed he does
ceilings. Yeah.
have, yeah, he's not very kind around those edges. We'll say that. Yeah, he probably has nothing but contempt around that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what, as far as I know, I mean, I'm not particularly versed in the inherent differences between Sunni and Shia, but what I am curious about is how far the current conflict in how far that has gone towards a sort of unity, if there is a possibility of such a thing, because it's I'm understanding now that Iraq is threatening to come in on the side of Iran, which is a wild course of events there. Um, Pakistan is
Mhm.
would come in on the side of. I mean, I understand they have security arrangements with the Saudis. Um,
Mhm.
and but I don't know that. Anyway, it's a complicated thing, but I wonder, is there any sort of sense of unity now that perhaps wasn't there before? Because I think the
On
United
the
States, yeah,
streets, yes. On the streets throughout the Arab Muslim world, everywhere, the sympathy is 100% with Iran. On the government to government, no. I mean,
mm,
and for obvious reasons. I mean, the Gulf countries are basically extensions of the United States and Israel.
right,
Whether and not just the Gulf. Jordan is a prime example, oldest example of it. But on the streets, yes, the sentiment is with Iranians. The messages I get from people from these parts of the Arab Muslim world proves it. Stuff I see online, whether on Twitter or Facebook or other platforms, all proves it. But these governments are, because of their, strategic alliances, are not there, which means that they're in a weak position, and that if this situation escalates any further than it is, there is a threat of something, something of the scope of the Arab Spring spontaneously combusting again in those parts of the Arab Muslim world, particularly in Bahrain. Which I mean, Bahrain, the royal family of Bahrain has pretty much escaped to Saudi Arabia right now,
right,
because the majority of the population in Bahrain are Shia Muslims, while its ruling family are Sunni Wahhabis,
mm,
more aligned with the Saudi form
mhm.
of Islam. Bahrain is definitely about to flip. Qatar and the UAE not there yet. The threat to the UAE isn't so much a insurrection by the people, because that whole whatever you want to call that place is not really a country.
Right,
It's like
right.
a extended. My father, my late father, went to the UAE about 20 years ago, and he came back and I asked him, I said, "Well, what do you think?" He says, "Oh, it's just one big American military base. It's a kind of a American military base slash casino." Um, so that was his
Yeah,
summation
wow.
20 years ago. So that, this is what we're dealing with. Um, what could happen, likely happen to if this escalates any further, the threat to the UAE especially is that it will cease as a viable nation state.
Right.
That could also happen to Bahrain. Qatar um, will probably be kicked back into the boondocks. Same with Kuwait. And I think it could also happen to a country like Jordan, depending on what happens to Israel.
Right, because I mean I don't know if the desalination plants are around, but it's my understanding, like, if a desalination plant goes down, then like Kuwait is just uninhabitable at that
Yeah,
point.
which has gone down. The Kuwaiti desalinization plants were hit because there were strikes coming from Kuwait targeted at Iran. So the IRGC targeted in retaliation. So Kuwait doesn't have any desalinization right now. What is it?
Wow.
I think, what are they? Population about 30 million people have no uh, have no drinking water right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and this is just continuing the cycle of like how I don't know, it's like America will go and bomb your country and then arrest you once you have to leave and get here. And it's just complain about the same sort of refugee crisis that we cause. And well, have you heard much about I mean, a few weeks ago, there was an oil refinery that was hit in Tehran, which caused a sort of
Yeah.
black rain. Have you been able to speak to any of your friends or colleagues
No,
about that
like I said, I
experience?
haven't heard from anyone in 4 weeks, and I've sent numerous messages, texts, tried to call them, nothing. I haven't heard anything from these people for the last 4 weeks.
Oh my God.
And one of them was not in short proximity, but in relatively near proximity of these oil refineries. So once that refinery in Tehran was hit, that level of toxicity would have certainly affected them. Pretty clear within the first few hours.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry to hear that, man. Yeah. Um, and it's the thought I had the other day was like, what are we doing hitting steel mills now? Because like we were hitting oil infrastructure, and all that requires steel to repair if the intention was for it to ever be repaired. So we're not only ruining the infrastructure, but we're ruining the steel plants that it takes to fix things. And now we've gone after universities, and in my mind, and I keep saying we, man, it sucks. I hate this country. But in my mind, it's like that's the kind of thing that you do when you don't understand your enemy, like, and you don't know where to hit, is you try to kill the knowledge part of that society. Um, and so like I when I see something like a tweet from Iran saying like, hey, we're gonna attack Palantir now, we're gonna attack Microsoft, we're gonna attack their data centers. Um, it's I really I mean, I just want them to fucking do it, man, at this point, like I feel like the levels of barbarism that have been normalized upon the planet, the ramifications of nuclear proliferation that will result of this around the Middle East, um, and the sort of acceleration of this otherwise a sort of generational change. I mean, who knows? Maybe this would have been gradual. Maybe the Western Hemisphere would have gradually ceded power over to the East, and maybe it would have been 550 years of Western dominance. But like, it at this point now, it's like, I mean, I talk to DeepSeek occasionally, which is the Chinese version of ChatGPT. And I'm well aware of how AI will agree with you and then agree harder and then agree harder and all that. But AI also has a propensity to sort of shy away from making uh broad sort of like statements that are like if you ask it, hey, like what are the probabilities of an atomic bomb going off? It might just be like, oh, well, there's certain precautions and things in front of that, and it won't give you a straight answer. But I've managed to convince DeepSeek to like get up to like a 95% now
Yeah.
probability of either Israel or the United States using a nuclear weapon. And that's really fucking scary to me. Um,
Well, last night before I went to bed, I was watching one of Rania Khalek's programs on YouTube, and she had Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute, who I
yeah.
have a sort of a love-hate relationship with. But I trust when he says these things because he is clued in and he has the contacts. And he said to her, when she asked him about it, that the nuclear weapons issue is on the table with the Trump administration itself, as well as the Israelis. That this has been discussed, and that he has been hearing back from people he knows that are on the ins with the Trump administration. So this is a real thing. We are there, um, which means that if we know this, then the Iranians obviously know this. And so there is a lot of feelers being put out by the Iranians right now that they are very shortly going to depart the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and which basically gets Iran to the place that the West was trying to prevent it from being. And depending on how much enriched uranium they have at their disposal, they could conceivably make about 10 to 11 bombs within a week. Now, as I mentioned, back in the 90s, late 90s, just after the fall of the Soviet Union, there were many rumors, many rumors that Iran had actually bought warheads from Ukraine and from some of these Central Asian republics, because these republics at the time were strapped for cash. And so it is very possible that they may even have in their warehouses deep underground several of these Soviet era, nuclear warheads that are pretty scary weapons.
Sure.
But here's the thing: the first nuclear weapon that is deployed, let's say Israel throws one on Tehran, the next one is going to land on Kiev. That because then, it's basically the first country that does that opens the door to everybody else to respond in kind. So we may have a nuclear exchange within the first week or even the first couple of days, not just between Israel and Iran, but also between Russia and the Europeans, the Chinese, the Koreans, and then the United States as well. We'll get into it. At that point, we're looking at basically the
Yeah.
cessation of life on this planet as we know it.
Yeah,
This is a
and
very real threat right now.
it's a real threat right now, but it's always been a threat that Americans, at least in the last I don't think that your average American goes about their day and thinks about the mutually assured destruction, but it's always been there. And one thing that maybe it was Trita, maybe it was John Mearsheimer was saying it, that at least in the Cold War, there was a red phone direct access between the Soviets and the Americans. So if there was any mistakes or anything like that, one could pick up the phone and get in contact with someone right away. But we do not have a red phone situation going on right now. And so yeah, there's and this goes back to the point we talked about earlier about the bad faith stuff, is that like the president is a person who is pathological liar, who has committed perfidy twice, and who is not trusted by anyone on the Iranian side at all, for good reason, for sensible, reasonable, powerful reasons. They are not able to trust anything that comes out of that person's mouth. And that extends back further. Like, can there be any sort of agreement on paper signed by the United States that holds any weight at this point?
Not at the moment. No, not at the moment.
Right.
Even in the best case scenario, not at the moment. This is why, um, Pakistan and a few other countries have now approached China to broker, because the Chinese are directly involved with Iran on the
Mhm.
military technology level, and they don't want to see this continue any further and they are also observing. They have their own warships docked, at a safe distance in the Persian Gulf. So this is interesting because the issue of the petrodollar to one side, now certain powers are turning to the Chinese to be the guarantor of any cessation of hostilities, which effectively signals that nobody trusts the United States anymore. And so, on a de facto level, America, with the Trump presidency, especially with this latest attack on Iran, has lost its status as hegemon on the diplomatic level. Nobody trusts the United States. Nobody wants to talk to the United States. You're seeing this also in the behavior of Europeans, beginning with Spain. It was now prohibited both American and Israeli military activities on its soil. Then you have the Danes, who were upper arms over Trump's threats to them. The German AfD, of all people,
Right.
has now demanded the departing of the American 50,000 American troops out of Germany. This is unprecedented
Yeah, the
territory.
far right in Italy is like just saying you can't use our airspace or something now,
Ooh,
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like we have,
yeah.
yeah. Oh my God.
So the Europeans are now beginning to find their own spine, because they realize that America is no longer a guarantor even of their safety. So NATO itself, and Poland, by the way, Poland also turned Trump down in the last couple of days. They wanted Trump wanted their interceptors,
Yeah.
and they said no. Our interceptors are ours. We're protecting our own space against the Russians.
There was a meme a while back, man, that was like Europe is a myth. It's actually an Asian peninsula, you know. And and at the time I remember thinking like I don't really understand this, but it's kind of funny. And then I started to read a little bit of Dugan, and I don't say this in a positive light, but the point of like foundation of geopolitics, Dugan's first book was that Russia would become an anti-American staging ground, and then Europe and the sort of Atlanticist powers would break apart, and Europe would return back to Asia in its more natural pairing.
Mm,
And so the more that I kind of see the way that this fire in the Middle East has geopolitically accelerated that aspect. Um, Another thing is that I read this book called uh, uh, it'll come to me in a second. It's written by Benjamin Teitelbaum, War for Eternity,
yeah, War
and
for Eternity.
and at the very end, he kind of leaves it off. He's talking about Bannon and about how Bannon somehow Bannon is familiar with the writings of like Julius Evola and Savitri Devi. At some point, Bannon calls Trump a man in time. And so you're laughing. I'm glad you're familiar with this shit, even though I'm sorry that you're familiar with this shit. But the point is that I'm saying is that I've started to think about the concept of the man in time, the sort of avatar of Vishnu, of the destruction of the current age, and I'm kind of scratching my head over here looking at this chaos that has erupted and the way the resultant world order looks to be set up, and it's like, man, like what else would a man in time do other than end 500 years of sort of Europe and North American sort of domination, and in setting the world on fire would break apart every sort of treaty that holds whatever we think of the dilapidated world order, like we have. It wasn't enough that every president before him committed war crimes and didn't hold to the Geneva Conventions or Nuremberg tribunals or any of the sort of professed Western values, right? It's not enough that but finally Trump has now sort of made the entire world look at Western values in a way and realize that it's barbarous, it's decadent, it's and all these ways that like some of the characters we've mentioned, like the Shahid Bolson, who would rail about Western decadency and immorality and things like that, in the way that Dugin would yell about how modernity is corrupt and is anathema. We need to return to tradition. Like it seems like this ecumenical jihad, as I called it, that Dugin organizes, right? It's like there are serious ruptures happening. And I are you thinking about any of these sort of Dugin lines of thought
No,
around
I
this
mean,
stuff?
I I have better people to read, like Fanon.
Touche.
You
Yeah,
know?
right, right.
So, I've been, Fanon is one of my proverbial prophets, So I go back to him quite frequently and to that lineage, the Fanonian lineage of writers.
Sure.
Um, but whether we're talking about Black Skin, White Masks or The Wretched of the Earth, the points that Fanon made in the late 1950s, early 1960s are very much germane to the conflict today. They're very much alive. Um, his epidermalization argument very much applies to this Iranian diaspora. I see this in black and white, the mentality, the psychology of these people who are basically clamoring for the bombing of their own country and their own people and their own families
Right,
back in Iran.
right.
It's all there. So I don't, I mean, Dugin This is something that the right has always done to some level of success, is to appropriate the left.
Sure.
So much of what we have seen from the new right, whether it be Alain de Benoit or his spawn Alexander Dugin, a lot of these arguments have a originally left-wing decolonial source,
Mm,
whether it be Fanon or anybody else. And it I think more of the left needs to look at this stuff rather than dismiss it. What I've been seeing, particularly since the last decade, is that because the right has kind of done a reverse Gramscian metapolitics by appropriating the left, much of the first world left is very hesitant with the decolonial discourse unless you're a person of color.
sure.
So the white left, and so what happens is that the white left gets increasingly pulled into the liberal center. And you see this in the United States,
Yeah.
unless you overtly identify yourself as communist or whatnot. And this is a problem because the arguments that people like Fanon and similar were putting out in the 1960s were very much, the thinking of that generation of the left in the 60s over the Vietnam War, etc. So, you know, my mother is switched on certain things, but she says today that she thinks that the people of the left back in her time, meaning the 60s, were far more intelligent than what she is finding today
Mm,
amongst what she's reading online and
sure.
whatnot. And this is something that I think the left does need to rectify. It needs to especially rectify it is because the left has now kind of segmented itself into pet interests, whereas back in the 60s, all of these issues were one issue, and they all converged on the moratorium in the anti-Vietnam War movement.
Mm,
Now everybody is basically beating their own drum. So you have the LGBTQ people on one side, the decolonial and anti-imperialist people on one side beating their drum. Everybody is talking at cross purposes. There's no unity, no solidarity. No one talks even about trade unionism amongst most of the left
right.
anymore.
Right.
And these are real problems. And this is why the right can then galvanize its own constituency against any kind of movement, appearing that can pose a real challenge to it, as happened in the late 1960s and early 1970s. This is where we need to be. We need to be back to where we were back in that era that gave a real fighting chance, and which scared the hell out of the establishment back in that time.
Yeah, the man, I would say that this it's confusing for your normal leftist, I would say, especially for Western leftists. Like when Russia did its first incursion into Ukraine, I kind of took a no war but class war line. I mean, I thought that this was a catastrophe, that innocent women and children would die, that no side of a war should be taken up like some sort of national sports team or something. Um, and that the only real losers out of this entire entanglement would be the working class, would be the innocent people on the ground that are just trying to live their life, who would have their lives disrupted. Um, and as the years have gone by, I looked at the equation, and I don't know that. I mean, it's like I'm pro-Ukrainian people, but from what I can tell, there's Azov Battalion and like
Yeah,
the real sort of culture of Nazism prominent within that part of the world, right? Um, the lines about from Putin talking about denazification, whereas first I did not take them seriously, have only grown to seem more real and you know for a person like Putin that speaks to this sort of, I mean, that 3 hour speech he gave, I've yet to go back and listen to that again, but I think on the premise of this being a whole new war here, like one would do well to go back and revisit what he spoke to as far as separation of like, or reuniting of like the Slavic families, and all that stuff that he front loaded his incursion with. Uh, and I've also gained more sympathy towards Russia after really understanding more, listening to people like Jeffrey Sachs, listening to stuff about NATO and how it moved eastward. And so all that to say is that I kind of look at Russia better, right, in a different light now, even though I don't agree with the way that, it's a dictatorship, or that it's a lot of different things. Like, they obviously repress their people, protesters, things like that. It's not 100% great society, obviously. Um, so it's complicated because now when I look at this, obviously there's the regurgitated propaganda of like, how can you support the Ayatollah when, and I'm like, yeah, obviously I'd rather have children that are alive than, than children that were made to, it just doesn't make
Here's
any sense, right? But it is
I've
confusing for
been
a Western
I
leftist.
I'm on
Yeah.
the same page as you, not just on Russia, but also on Iran, and also the PRC. Look, here's the way I've kind of posed the problem myself, and it's a dialectic still in process in my thinking. When you have these countries that are the target of imperialism, and they are squeezing and squeezing and squeezing these countries in various different ways. Um, we have to be able to, at least philosophically, separate the question of freedom, democracy, liberty from security, um, and the viability of a functioning state, because the imperialists
Hmm.
want to turn every state into a failed state for purposes of extraction, exploitation, all the rest. And the question so is it possible for these, currently authoritarian states to behave differently towards their own people than they otherwise would?
Hmm.
And I am kind of, this is where the whole aporia with me right now is, one side of me answers yes, another side of me answers no. They can't, given the material conditions that they're facing. So I don't know. I mean, I am not an apologist for any kind of dictatorship. I despise authoritarianism in every form of it. But, I try to also understand the perspective from the other side. I have no love for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei or, that whole system, but I am beginning to see that at least the system Iran does have a point. And this point was proven very dramatically twice now, whether in June of last year or as of February 28th of this one. Um, and so what else can they do? And if you have a restless population that doesn't want to play ball, that whose actions may even disadvantage themselves if taken to its logical conclusion, what can be done? And I think for me, to some degree, that question was answered in January, is because when you had an attempted coup in Iran, where a organic protest movement against the crashing of the Iranian currency is hijacked by the Mossad with, I
Right.
mean, Pompeo, no one can say this is a conspiracy theory. Mike Pompeo went on record on Twitter himself saying this, and others. What can a government, what can a system in like Iran do? Are they going to sing kumbaya to their people when there's a coup happening?
Yeah,
What do
yeah.
you
It
do?
it, it sounds like, and I mean, it's I'm a little old to have to recite the reasons that pulled me into my love for the USSR, right? Is that like, it's like you try, corralling a whole state as large as Russia after you have, a list of other nations create a white army and try and invade you. You have a civil war erupt, then you have a second world war and you're invaded by the Germans, and then after that, I mean, you're gonna villainize people for like, getting a little bit of wheat when they need it or something, dude. Like, you're gonna squeeze us and criticize us when we breathe, criticize the way we breathe, sort of thing. Like, part of me uh thinks back to when I had a conversation once with Gabriel Rockhill. And I was thinking through that line at the moment when I was speaking to him, and I was like, brother, like I had a moment where I understood that like there was an equal and opposite Operation Paperclip. Like after the United States scraped the swastikas off the sides of the rocket ships and put an American flag on them and got German scientists to help them make a bomb. It's like, well, there was also called Operation Ossewiecim, which was the Russian equivalent of that, of getting ex-Nazi scientists and trying to get whatever knowledge they had towards their weapons development. And, Gabriel Rocco looked at me and he was like, well, what would you do, man? Certainly you should have to do that probably. If that's what they're going to do, then that's what you probably should have done because you couldn't just, allow one side to develop the atomic bomb and then, not get your own fill of German knowledge towards rockets and things when the time came for purposes of purity, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yep.
that's an interesting thing to separate the questions of security and state viability from, life, liberty, freedom, that sort of
Because I
stuff.
mean,
Yeah,
look at it this way. We have perfect examples now in Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, take your pick, some of
right.
the Latin American, South American countries, but particularly Libya, um, of what happened, right? When a
Yeah.
state fails like that, as what Libya was, and the Libyan Jamahiriya Republic wasn't a dictatorship. I mean, it's been painted that way in the West, but it was authoritarian, but not a strict dictatorship in the way that most people conceive it. And Gaddafi did take care of his people. He created a cradle to grave welfare system, educated his population. Libyans had a good life
Hmm.
by and large. But once the NATO attack came, and the jury's still out on whether what percentage of the population back then was actually opposing the Gaddafi regime. But once the NATO attack came, and these NATO-backed Islamist head choppers poured into Tripoli and other parts of Libya, the consequence is what we see today: a country split in the middle with different centers of authority. Slavery is now a form of commerce in that place, and the country's a failed state.
Yeah. And I mean, in many ways, that's what their goal is for Iran. That's what uh, the goal is, like to make Iran similar to what Syria is, uh, for purposes of extraction, for purposes of maybe some Lebensraum in there as well, the Greater Israel Project,
Oh,
uh, which, to me, it's like I'm looking at the United States and I don't know that it needed to lash out and attack Iran in a war of aggression uh, in order to do anything in the Western Hemisphere, because like the sort of declining empire's more practical move would to just proceed immediately to receding to the Western Hemisphere and then maybe shoring up Cuba and Greenland and talking about absorbing parts of Canada or something. Like if it seemed like the more uh, tactical and useful move for a dying hegemon to make. Um, but man, I even here in Texas, like speaking to you from the heart of fascism, uh, the as there are talks of the United States going into Cuba or threatening Greenland, its fascist little brother Texas has to start talking about absorbing counties in New Mexico.
hmm.
Um, so yeah, man, this I don't know that the United States really needed to do this in order to do what a dying hegemon should be doing. Um, but now that it's there and it's trapped and it's like it can't really dictate the end of this war. Um, I've been seeing these interesting videos of Legos pieces made where I want to believe that these Lego videos have some basis in the reality of sentiment of the Iranian people, the IRGC. When I see them in these, and I don't know who's making these videos, but when I see in this particular Lego video of this one's for Rachel Corrie, this one's for the Native
Hmm.
Americans, This one's for flight 655 or 56. I forget the number of the flight that was shot down, and the United States never apologized for it. Um, and this sort of listing of grievances, of atrocities and war crimes and barbarism shown through generations. I mean, it gives me the chill thinking that there could be this sort of vengeance, this sort of uh, maybe that's what the red flag of revenge being raised in Iran is in some ways meant to. I mean, obviously, there's the girls at the Manab school, there's uh, Ayatollah Khomeini, there's Ariel Arjani, there's Qasem Soleimani, there's
There's
Yahya.
the 8-year war with
Yeah,
Iraq.
yeah, there's the 8 year war with Iraq where we gave them chemical weapons. You know, there's Yahya Sinwar. There's just so much that it makes me want to pull my hair out, bro. That like your everyday American does not even fucking grasp a tiniest bit of like how wrong and how bad faith and how murderous we have been towards Iran and how
Well,
restrained and yeah, I mean, you were going to say something. Go ahead. Yeah.
here's a question I have yet to receive an adequate response to by any liberal centrist. Is that if you are a country, a developing country that is the target of imperialism, do you weaken yourself by adopting a polity or a system like your opponent in the form, because this is their grievance. You're not a democracy, a liberal democracy, therefore you're bad. You're a dictatorship. You should be
Right.
destroyed, regime change in your country, turned into a basket until it can develop into what we have.
Mhm.
But this is stupid talk that these people engage in. So the question I ask is do you see the viability of your opponent adopting your system when you are targeting it? And there's no guarantee that if they do that, they will cease to be targeted.
Right.
Right. So this is a viability question. I'm not saying that dictatorships are good, but
Well,
I'm just
see,
posing this question: is it possible? Now let's be frank. Iran's system is not a classic authoritarian system. There is a dispersion of power in Iran. It has a constitution. There are elections. Parliament is elected, and other branches of government. There are certain branches of government that are not elected by the people. But yet there is a constitution. There is a due process within the bounds of that system. Um, and to the degree that it is able to function, it has functioned for 47 years. I don't like it. I don't agree with its ideological backbone. But by and large, for all of its faults, it has operated. And now, as it is being assaulted, it is giving empire a hell of a fight.
yeah.
That tells you something.
Yeah, I think about the way that the United States is falling to the it kind of makes me fucking smile in the way that like, yeah, man, the hubris of a 250-year-old country, you know, the hubris of a country that, we're very I think that Americans and Americanism is very similar to Israelis and Israelism in the sense that,
Big time. Yeah.
yeah, like in the sense that this sort of sense of supremacy has gone to a lot of people's heads.
Yeah, the
But
exception of the exceptionalism
yes,
is just
yes,
there, right in your face. Yeah.
yeah, and
And more so in liberals than sometimes than even conservatives.
yeah, I mean the smugness of a liberal that rollerblades to work is something that like but I kind of prefer the racism of a conservative to the smugness of a liberal at times, because you can kind of tell like what camp that person is in and they're lodged in there and that's not going to shake very easily. But I can deal with, you know, I can deal with that because I feel like, I mean, it's not excusable. It's not what I'm saying, but I can understand it on a level to where the smugness that is unearned, like through sheer geographical luck, so much of our success in life comes down to something like the zip code that you were born in.
Yeah.
So if you're born in the global north in a proper zip code that and you are just a, like, I don't know, like a Silicon Valley fucking guy that has generational wealth, and the smugness is completely unearned to a point where it's part of me, I've said this before, that like I don't know that the sort of exceptionalism that Americans feel is ever going to change until such time as something like like maybe just getting our home territory bombed, like a couple ICBMs to sort of smack us in the jaw and be like, listen, motherfuckers, this is what you've been doing across the globe, and you cannot expect the rest of the world to just understand and allow this to continue. And so in that sense, it's like, I not only does Iran have my sympathy, but I totally understand that they've got to put some belt to ass for a minute to change the material conditions on the ground. The entire security equation in the Middle East must change in order to have some sort of security concerns met on the part of Iran. And since the United States does not have anybody that has ever had to compromise with other countries in diplomacy at all, on staff or in recent memory or what have you, we're just incapable of compromise, of recognizing the other security concerns, of no one thinks that Donald Trump is going to lick his wounds and walk away and not fall into like a sunken cost fallacy thing. Like everyone expects him to do the worst possible thing. Everyone expects him to not be diplomatic. And we're all just fucking kidding ourselves if we think he gives a shit about any of us or the soldiers' lives. Like, someone like Professor Barandi will say, like, he's contended that the Americans actually don't care about their dead soldiers.
No, they don't.
They don't, and it's, you know, that there's a good possibility that if there is a ground invasion and there are a good number of casualties that get back reported to the public, that public sentiment will harden at that point in the American sort of social, national conversation. And then it'll just go on for years, and we're just going to throw more lives at the meat grinder at that point. And if that's what it takes to make America walk away with its hat in hand and like, and discontinue its raping and pillaging of other countries, I mean, I don't think it will. I think we'll just go back to the, Western Hemisphere, fuck with Cuba, maybe fuck with Greenland. I don't think that you make a mad dog unmad. And I think of the way that, many world wars have ended. It's like it's an unconditional surrender that's followed by a sort of ideological re-education or something, like rewrite Japan's entire constitution. Germany is not allowed to have a military now, that sort of thing, right? What I can't imagine the United States willfully going into some kind of agreement where we have to temper our militarism, where we have to, I don't know, stop cooing in third world countries, or stop any of this barbarism. Like it may just stop with like you said, we may just be on a one-way road somehow to nuclear confrontation. We could be on a road. What I hope best case scenario is how I would like for it to turn out is the United States just, end our hegemony, make us go back to the Western Hemisphere, and then just bomb the shit out of Israel, and wipe that place off the fucking map.
Amen.
Like that's what I'm really hoping for at this point. But I don't know if you have some stuff to say around a lot of that.
Well, let me put it this way. From what I'm seeing, and especially because I watch the right and I watch the far right, especially
Sure.
I follow people like Nick Fuentes. I want to know where their
Right.
perspective on things are because they influence quite a lot of people. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, all the rest of these guys.
Right.
And I analyze deeply what they're saying. And from the sounds of it, under Trump, Israel overreached, right? There were already grievances
Sure.
against Israel and the Israel lobby in the United States. But with these last two episodes, whether last year in June and now, the argument has been made to the American public, with the cherry on the top obviously being the Epstein files, that the time of this particular political bloc must be ended. So any future political candidate, and this may not, you might not immediately see it in 2028, but very shortly after that you will. So this pro-Zionist, pro-Israel narrative of the American political class will be shelved, because there is now a generation rising, right, that are very conspicuously anti-Zionist. And in my opinion, this is becoming, even as you mentioned right at the beginning, this is starting to take a very extreme edge.
Yes.
It's venturing into full-blown Nazi-esque anti-Semitism. So even as a strategic step, those voices within the Jewish community of the United States must themselves spearhead this drive to cut the size of the Israel lobby and the influence of Israel within the United States. Because if this is, and you're not going to put this into check by, going to business as usual as you have now, you have to adopt a literal anti-Israel, anti-Zionist line. And literally cut these people out of the political system for good, including their neocon friends. And that is coming. That tidal wave is coming. I'm not that optimistic about what the Democrats may or may not do if they take the House and the Senate come November. They are just as much responsible for what we're witnessing now, except with this current president in the White House, you have a deranged, unhinged individual who has no idea of how to manage anything. He thinks that managing geopolitics is like managing his real estate ventures in New York City with a different environment. But that is coming. The mood is there, the sentiment is there, and the momentum is definitely there. So Israel is finished. And I think to some degree they understand this, and this is why this explains their own impatience. Because under Trump, this is the last opportunity they have to implement their final program. And if it fails for good. And I am reasonably confident that it has failed. They underestimated Iranian capabilities. They didn't learn the lesson that they needed to learn back in June of last year. And Netanyahu lied to Vladimir Putin when he sent out that message that Israel had no intention of attacking Iran anymore. If you remember that, he said this right a few months after the June war.
Right.
So that credibility is forever shattered, together with the fact that Israel itself has overreached. They're getting their asses handed to them by Hezbollah right now, worse than what Hezbollah did to them in 2006, which tells you that all the claims that Hezbollah had been, neutered as of the assassination of Nasrallah in 2024, just says it's all nonsense. They've regrouped, they've rearmed, and their fighting capabilities are deadly. I think it was Mearsheimer or someone else a couple of days ago or yesterday. I watched something who said that over the last month, about 100 Merkava tanks have been taken out by Hezbollah, just in the skirmishes that they've been having on the northern border. Israel still may have air superiority, but air superiority only goes so far when there's an issue of you trying to take territory. You can't take territory from the sky. It has to be in the land, and Israel is not succeeding. So their infrastructure is in ruins. They are almost at zero with their interceptors. So, only yesterday, Parsi actually mentioned this in that podcast with Rani Khalek, that the Iranian strikes are 80% that Iran is sending is hitting its target in Israel, just in Israel. This is disaster. Then one of the army chiefs of staff announced, I think about a week ago, that the IDF is at the breaking point, that if they don't replenish their ranks and supplies, that it's going to flounder. If this keeps going any longer than it is. Iran has managed to target successfully for elimination a lot of key sensitive Israeli military figures. So, 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 I think cautiously but optimistically, um, even Israel is here on the ropes. Iran is utilizing a rope a dope strategy. It is taking a lot of blows. It's absorbing a lot. As of yesterday, I think it was probably close to the just over the 2,000 mark of people that have been um, killed in Iran. Um, the damage to property is through the charts over there, but still they are fighting and fighting very well and escalating. And all these announcements, whether from the United States or Israel, that are coming out that Iran is nearly done and they're, you know, we've managed to knock out this, that, and the other thing, their Navy and their Air Force and this sort of thing, means nothing. That's not the war that Iran has been fighting. Iran didn't have a developed Air Force nor a developed conventional Navy. They adopted this fifth generation asymmetrical kind of strategy with missiles, drones, etc. And they are beating Israel and the United States to the punch right now, all over that region.
Yeah, I wonder how long it's going to take for. I mean, I'm happy to have the sort of societal awakening within the United States that's like, A, we don't want to go to war. B, fuck Israel. And C, stop APAC, right? Like all this stuff, this sort of a broader conversation that's happening. I'm very pleased to report that that is a conversation that's happening on the street commonly now. I mean, I was just hanging out with a veteran friend of mine who just said, "Hey, man, for me, it's real simple. Like, you don't hurt kids." And, uh, and that seems to be what the United States seems to be one of their tactics, one of the Israeli tactics. I mean, he was uh, really radicalized through watching Gaza. Um, but yeah, so yeah, Iran is absorbing a lot of hits right now, man. And Israel is being hit on three sides. They have Yemen to the south of them, they have Iran to the east, and they have Hezbollah at the north through Lebanon. And in being pummeled by three sides, they have a society right now, which, as you mentioned, with the IDF needing more soldiers. I want to say that I saw something about 400,000 being called up from reserves. It is a separate question as to how like one separates the IDF from just their civilians, though, because like insofar as that every civilian must serve a couple of years in the IDF, it is a reflection. Their society is a reflection of the barbarism of that ideology. But I say all this because having the society that spends all this time in bunkers now, right? They're not getting any sleep, and I see lots of complaints of people like, oh, I had to run to the alarm. I saw a video where a man was like, "Hey, how do you move an injured person to the bunker in 5 minutes?" Like this man shouting in Hebrew about this stuff. So there's like real distress and lack of sleep and on edgeness happening within Israeli society now, which I can't remember a time when Israeli society had experienced this level of stress.
Not at this level. I mean, they
No,
they they came close to it in '73 with the Yom Kippur War, but not at this level that they're. I mean, even with the Israeli military censorship all over Israel, I mean, Tel Aviv and Haifa are now practically looking like Gaza. Israel's never
yeah,
been here.
yeah. I don't. This is uncharted territory for them. But it's
Well, the
not on.
fact the
Yeah,
fact that even the discussion of nuclear weapons is on the table, per what Trina Parsi said yesterday, tells you what's going on, how much their backs are against the wall. If it wasn't, this wouldn't be a discussion.
and this is part of the reason why Iran cannot afford to allow Israel or the United States to back off or to end a war or to end their aggressions. And I say that having, realized from you learning just a few minutes ago when you mentioned that part of the sort of rules of engagement through this type of Islam is that you should not attack an enemy when they're in retreat. Which is a wild thing to think that like fuck, man, are they gonna like just retreat and then launch? Perhaps knowing this, because I mean, as much as there's an incuriosity about the other, I'm sure that the people that are militarily engaging understand that there are certain rules that the opponent's going to abide by. This sort of bonus ethics, if you will, that they just and it sucks, man. Just like I'm seeing pictures posted by Professor Morandi now that are, pictures of children's feet in the same way we saw limbs of
Yeah.
children in
So
Gaza. And it's
yeah.
really tough, man, to know the whole world is a lot of the world anyway. When I say the whole world, I mean probably China, Russia, all of Iran, you know, these countries are, I mean, Spain to a certain extent, like there's a lot of people in the world that are in solidarity with Iran during this entire thing. And I'm sure that a retaliation in kind, even if it was a bit more savage than they normally do, would not be seen as something that would be like morally reprehensible of the Iranians to do, because they're just being treated with barbarism right now and savagery, and rules of engagement are not a thing. And when all this is said and done, and this crisis is not so top of mind, and maybe the world settles a little bit, there's going to need to be a huge discussion around a reordering of uh,
100%.
like some kind of new Nuremberg tribunals, or something
Absolutely.
stronger than the Geneva Convention, because
Well, I mean, there is no Geneva Convention that Israel especially hasn't broken,
yeah,
and not just since 28th of February. They've scrapped everything. They violated everything,
yeah,
crossed
yeah,
every red line there is,
yeah, and normalized it to such a degree
and
that,
normalized.
like when you have a conversation with your normal everyday person, they would now sort of, you know, be some, hey, they bombed a girl's school, you're liable to get a response of like, well, that's war. Like the normalization of American aggression, uh, that, I mean, I obviously it kind of started after, I think the bombings of London and the bombings of Dresden is the first time within contemporary warfare where civilians were targeted through that. That's the point in history that we're taught to look at that way. But uh, things like the My Lai massacre, and Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo have all led to this point where the barbarism has been unleashed, and it's seen as already always having been there. And I mean, it takes people like to take a step back and be like, wait a second, this is not how one engages. This is not an honorable way to engage in war. This is not the conscientious objector line is apparently receiving 1,000% more calls now, because the soldiers on the ground, uh, at least the ones that are calling in, understand what a moral injury this is to have to abide by these sort of orders. And insofar as one volunteers for their country to protect it or serve it, one does not sign up to sort of carry a sort of moral injury the rest of their life by killing children or women or civilians or uh, any number of things that the United States and Israel have normalized now.
That's the question. But my question is, will China, Russia, and other of the upcoming BRICS country, including Iran, can they be the guarantor to precisely this return to the rule of law? That is the question. That is a very important question.
Like, can we move the
Um,
UN to Beijing, or do we have to make a whole new UN type of organization,
well, I mean, move it to Geneva, where most of its operations are already based.
Yeah.
You know, but it needs to leave New York,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. I mean, my thought out of this was that not only does the UN need to leave New York, but there needs to be some sort of like whoever leads the UN should be something like a Palestinian refugee or something. I mean,
What we
yeah,
need, I mean, the Security Council setup that needs to be radically reformed. It is
yeah,
extremely unjust setup, giving more votes to these powers. I mean, it's basically, I don't know what people were thinking at the time, but when you give that kind of power to several key founding members, you're ensuring an uneven distribution of power. in a global system. And this uneven distribution of power has been precisely what has ailed global political relations since the end of the Second World War.
Mm.
If,
Yeah.
for example, there was maybe, I don't know, a rotating Security Council membership that gave equal, balance of rights to each of the participant members of that Security Council, perhaps the system would operate in a much just way. I mean, you see this, I mean, at least in theory, the way the US Congress is set up, House, Senate, right?
Right.
Um, the way that the Security Council is set up as the kind of the Senate of the UN, it's as if you had a handful of states, California, New York, Texas, and a couple of more of the populous state, five of them, representing the interests of the United States as a whole.
Right. Right.
Most people should think about that.
Yeah.
We need a system that is going to equally distribute this power. So the Security Council needs to both be expanded and give representation to each of its member states. And not give that kind of veto power to the bigger states that said the United States, Russia, and China have.
Yeah. I mean, to me,
Right?
it was always like the United States had the finger on the scale of everything that happens there.
Yeah.
It's like, how can you invent this world order and then uh, make it sort of compromising with you, like make it to where you dominate it and it's fundamentally unfair. And yet this is supposed to be the organization that the rest of the country of the world come to. It was never going to work out so long as there was a partiality there, like as far as
Yeah.
the United States role there. Yeah.
I mean, at the moment, the Chinese are behaving extremely well on the
Right.
international stage. But that temptation, once you become a hegemon, is always going to be there. Will the Chinese be able to curtail themselves? And what guarantees do we have that they will? So mechanisms need to be put into place for any kind of future body.
Yeah. I mean, in the sense that like we hear this kind of from time to time about the Europeans being paranoid about Russian aggression or so a realist might say like, well, that's preposterous because Russia's never invaded Europe. It's always been invaded from its west. And so the security concerns of the Europeans amount to nothing more than paranoia. But, the only way a lasting peace is ever achieved to me, it seems like through a mutual recognition of security concerns. And
Absolutely.
and so, like,
Yeah.
if we're going to say, hey, the Europeans' security concerns all amount to paranoia, well, they are still paranoid about being invaded. And so one needs to recognize their security concerns, whether they're fictitious or not. Um, and insofar as China is concerned, going back to what you were just saying, like, China to me seems like it's not really eager to be the hegemon. Like it's like when Iran said, "Oh, you can come through the Strait of Hormuz if you pay in yuan." That had nothing to do with the Chinese, and they were just kind of like, "Okay, we'll take it, sure." And so far as the Chinese are making the drones that are being used in both Iran and in Ukraine. Like they seem to be more interested in commerce and not necessarily interested in going around the world and being the world's police.
This is
Um,
what I'm saying.
but we can't,
Once,
yeah,
yeah, you can't guarantee that because once
right,
a given power becomes a hegemon, that temptation for even more domination is always present. We saw this with the United States itself. I mean, it came out of the Second World War as this beneficent power, had
right.
defeated the Nazis, had helped the Soviet Union, but then immediately after the war ends, it, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
that temptation to overreach and to, meddle and do this, that, and the other thing is always there. I mean, all of the problems that we are seeing in Iran, particularly right now, stem from that act of folly in 1953 in the toppling of Mohammad Mossadegh
yeah,
in the government of Iran.
yeah.
Because the blowback from that was the revolution of 1978-79 and Khomeini.
Hmm.
And this is the irony that I don't know what people in the current administration were thinking, but from my reading of the situation, Trump and all of those people, Hegseth, etc., were kind of looking at toppling the Islamic Republic as kind of a version of the August 1953 coup d'etat on steroids, with the
Yeah.
son of the same guy that the United States brought into power in 1953. This was the folly of their thing, not thinking that, look, you know, 80, almost 80 years has transpired from that time. A lot has happened, and you have had a militant Islamic State in power for 47 years now. And especially in the last 20 years, it has been preparing for precisely such a day. This is not 1953. Don't even go there.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of fantasy thinking and the kind of myopia that operates in the Beltway. They
And,
think in the
and it makes me wonder too, with like reports of Pete Hegseth's errant investments into BlackRock that did not make him any
yeah.
money. It's like, how fucking dumb do you have to be to insider trade and not make any money? But the greater point that hints at it, and this is part of what I was trying to say earlier about how like there's this greater conversation going on within the national discourse of waking up to Israel causing us more harm than good. And I'm wondering, like, is America finally going to understand that the Pentagon not being able to pass its own audits and repetitiously going into asymmetrical warfares with technology that far and exceeds their opponents by, decades of advanced military. We have the most advanced weapon developers in the world here on our shores. They
Not
make our
anymore, I
weapon.
would say.
Well, not
Not,
anymore,
not
right? They're going to go where the
yeah,
money is. Where
yeah.
they will go where the money is.
No, but
Um,
look,
but
somebody
how
said,
much of that is like a big money laundering scam,
oh,
though?
it's the whole
The
thing
whole
is
fucking
the
thing,
money
right?
laundering. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, the whole thing's money. But you said China's making Iran's drones. China's actually not making Iran's drones.
Oh,
Iran is making its own drones.
right,
The
right.
a
Okay.
lot of these engineers and mechanical engineers and whatnot that came to the West and the United States all went back. So much of this drone tech and missile technology that Iran has is its own. Its industry is local. Its engineering is local. Yes, they are sharing technology with the Chinese, and the Chinese are sharing technology back with them. But the final output is all Iranian, to the point that much of these Shahed drones that Iran made found their way into Ukraine. So the Russians are buying Iranian drones in their fight against the Ukrainians. This has been going on since
Wow.
2022.
Yeah.
This is
Wow.
also one of the reasons for the alarm of the Israelis, because Iranian military technology and industry itself has mushroomed
Oh,
to a
yeah,
level.
yeah,
This was
yeah.
part of the concern. And what we're witnessing at the moment is not Chinese or Russian technology; these are pure Iranian technology itself.
Wow.
And this is
Yeah.
scaring the bejesus out of the Pentagon and Tel Aviv both.
I had not thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense that it would scare weapons development stuff in Israel, because what else do they do other than, like they
I mean, the war theater angle aside,
yeah.
this is putting these big, weapons manufacturing companies putting the fear of God into these people. Because if Iran comes out the other end smelling like roses, they have to go back to the drawing board and they will lose investment guaranteed.
Yeah.
Because in real time, Iran is not just rewriting the rules of engagement in war, as we're seeing, but they're also rewriting the whole industry.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, because I mean, what's the point if you have F-35s and you have, B-52s, you have all these huge bombs, and yet they're shot out of the sky, and you can't, if you can't, do away with a middle power, right? Then what's the point? And I mean, you see Marco Rubio out here saying like, well, if the people of if the government of Iran would invest in its people instead of missiles, and it's the most hypocritical shit I've ever heard. Like, it's incredible that he would say something like that. But yeah, I would hope that yet another defeat in asymmetrical warfare, uh, get another war where, just like in Iraq, where we replaced the Taliban with the Taliban, we replaced Khomeini with Khomeini over here. Um, how many wars is it going to take before the American people at some point are like, hey, like we could have had health care. My mother could have still been here. Family members should have had better lives. The bridges wouldn't be falling apart. Like, I have my grievances with the West, and part of it is that, like, I don't think the apotheosis of political thought should be, hey, let's stop all our wars and spend all our money on ourselves. Like, I think that's really short-sighted, as far as, and it's in typical American society, it cuts off as far as America's interests stop. It doesn't think about the rest of the world. Um, but surely at some point, and maybe it'll be this war, when our ass is handed to us and we have to show contrition on a global stage in order to comply with some sort of, you know, set war resolution thing, like if we have to offer reparations, which I couldn't
Well,
imagine the United States ever doing something like that. But that's what's on the
any
table.
mark
Yeah.
any Marxist of any hue in the United States needs to make people understand over there that the political and economic elites of the United States are saying two things. They're saying fuck the American public, and they're saying fuck the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It is about them. This is this is the core issue that people need to understand. Once this is accepted, once this is understood in all of its details, then you move to the next step. It's not because it's not only this is where I think a lot of these America First conservatives don't are not kind of representing issues correctly to their own constituency. They want it, we don't want these war. We want them to be spent on us. That's fine, right? But you also need to then simultaneously realize that your political class has not just been saying fuck you to you, it has been saying fuck you to the rest of the world as well,
Yes.
right? And these two issues are linked. It's not just a war against you. It's not only not about you. It will, you will benefit from the moment that you constrain your political and economic class from saying fuck you to the world.
Hmm.
That's how it works. So you benefit basically throwing the whole lot of these people out on the curb if it takes that to get there.
Yeah. Well, I
And so
mean,
then you will benefit, and everything, and the rest of the world will benefit, and then we can have a real harmonious order of states. We
right,
can have a rules based order that is genuine.
right. Yeah. And, maybe we get the United Nations not to be in New York anymore because they don't fucking deserve that at this point. It never did. And I don't think they ever, ever intended on uh, abiding by the rules-based order they set out to establish. Um, you know, it's getting a little easier at times to talk to people about this, man. Like, I'll tell you that one of the entryways I found recently was with a woman who's devoutly Catholic, and I speak to her from time to time, but she's a triple trumper, and
Oh boy.
right? So a severely Catholic triple trumper. And the other day I was like, hey, did you know that the mausoleum of, St. Peter was destroyed in Lebanon? And she's like, let me guess, was that an Iranian missile? And I'm like, no, that's in Lebanon. Why would they attack their ally? That's an Israeli rocket that did that, and so it sucks that to think about like this sort of things that have been around since the dawn of humanity, man, the history that's going to be lost and destroyed uh during the back and forth of this. Um and I know that there are things there that like it mean different things to different people. Like the Al-Aqsa Mosque is something that means a lot to folks in the Muslim world. And I know that the mausoleum of St. Peter means a lot to people in the Christian world. There was a church in Jerusalem that was the first time during Good Friday was blocked, the first time in 1,000 years.
Yeah, Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is one of the two sites in Jerusalem that is believed to be the site of Jesus's crucifixion. Yeah.
Yeah. First time in 1,000 years it was closed. And I do remember, I think it might have been during Trump's first terms where he tweeted or threatened to go after uh Iranian religious sites. So like the full, spectrum of barbarism is on the table. And if that's not enough, it's really, I mean, you can look at this as a sort of attack on Iranian society itself, like as an attempt to break apart Iranian society. So whether you're
Yeah.
speaking to like the targeting of police stations or the targeting of hospitals or the targeting of schools, the targeting of universities. Um, it's just it's I understand that the United States has gone to war in the past, and I understand that at times they have engaged in ways that break the Geneva Convention. But I regret to say that I think that this particular war is just it's like that cereal box, like oops, all berries. It's like oops, all war crimes at this point. Like the entire war from start to finish at this point has been nothing but Geneva Convention violations and rules of engagement, ignoring and a savagery that should make any American pause and wonder what the fuck we're doing, because like if the My Lai massacre happened every day, the Vietnam War would have not lasted as long, I would hope. Um,
But just
and
remember how long it took for that all to come out for the My Lai massacre in
right,
Vietnam.
right. Yeah, I have enough pattern recognition in me and enough like skepticism to where I can surmise a lot of this stuff but I just don't know that the everyday American, especially if they're just getting their information from Fox News, uh, it's a totally different reality these folks are living in. And it's really difficult here for those of us that are trying to do something about this stuff to even communicate with these folks. There's a real adherence to ignorance, and again, I think it's something. It doesn't seem like something you can talk them out of as much as it's something that will, at some point, with the right aberration, psychologically break. You know, and this is why I think about like things like, what if the U.S. mainland was bombed? Would that create the psychological impact of breaking that exceptionalism or breaking that perceived invincibility? Um, or would it just be maybe just a geopolitical humiliating loss? Like if we,
Which is this moment,
it's this
right?
moment, man. And
Yeah.
like if this moment doesn't do something for them, then what might possibly would, Like, so yeah, it is this moment. And we'll have to see how things goes. I mean, not to ask you to speculate on where this might go, but to ask you to, as far as what your speculations might be, like, hey, do you have any sort of indication or theory on how this might progress, or are you pessimistic towards its running of its course, or where are you with all this?
Analyzing the overall situation and the economic one particularly, and the kind of pressure that is probably being applied to the United States right now from overseas. I know the government in this country has really put the foot on the pedal of pressuring Trump. I can't see this going on for, if we want to be, um, I can't see this going any longer than another 2 months maximum. It will break the global economy irreparably if
Yeah,
it does. Um, on the social level, look, I look at American society based on conversations and experience I'm having with people over there. That society is terminal.
mm,
I can't recognize the United States of today versus the United States that I knew, that I grew up in the 80s and in the 90s. Very different United States. That innocence is lost. Um, there are a lot of people broken, even people from privileged, you know, families and whatnot. The pressures are backbreaking, and none of these internal contradictions are being remotely addressed. Whether you're talking on the, kind of the base social level, or whether you're talking about institutions from court systems, etc., the system is near breaking point. Trump and these America Firsters promised that they were going to attend to all of this. They haven't. That whole doging of everybody right at the beginning of his presidency is only now beginning to catch up with the system, where things are not working properly. I mean, I was watching the other night and reading also. the people responsible for monitoring these Tomahawk missile strikes in the Pentagon, that entire office was doaged. This was one of the reasons why that those schools in Minop were
Mm.
bombed, because the person responsible for overseeing this whole task no longer had a job.
And that makes more sense. Is like that was the first wave. Like first waves are planned. They're impeccably planned, right? And that's part of the reason why I thought it could not have been something that was unintentional because it surely, but that makes a lot of sense. It would have been slipped through the cracks if there wasn't a person there monitoring that was Doge. Yeah. Yeah. I
So, I mean, it's like American society as of the second Trump presidency is being completely gutted. Institutions that people counted on and relied on are either no longer existing or on their way to not existing. This is not a good sign. Not a good sign. This whole libertarian, neoliberal kind of nonsense that much of the American public is now taking for granted. They don't realize that this, does not benefit them. And what Reagan said in the 1980s applied to that era doesn't apply to the 21st century. Just a different terrain now. But this is what I'm seeing. American society is terminal, and the global order now is beginning to realize this. And so this war is the straw that broke the camel's back, and you're starting to see the behavior of much of the world going in that direction. And that China is now being called to be the broker of a peace is a milestone. That means that the world is moving on from the United States. So once that is enshrined in some fashion, even in a de facto fashion, this cannot but have very adverse long-term repercussions internally within the United States. It will have a cascading effect on many other things.
mm,
So, I mean, the next administration that comes in will have its work cut out for it. Very big time. They will basically be administering an imploding machine.
right. Right. Well, maybe we'll leave it at that. Wahid, I can't tell you how thankful I am to have these conversations with you, my brother.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. I'm so happy to talk to you for a bit, even if the subject matter is possibly, I mean, I'm trying not to confuse the end of Western civilization with the end of the world because, like, they could probably do without us at this point. Like, you know, uh, with all the shit that's been caused by this hemisphere at this point, it's like everyone just deserves a moment of peace. Um, well, listen, brother, I love you. I'm gonna hit stop now.
Thank you.
Yeah, man.